Welcome to the podcast about venture capital, where investors and founders alike can learn how VCs make decisions and reach conviction. Your host is Nick Moran, and this is The Full Ratchet.
Welcome back to TFR for a special installment of Investor Stories. In this segment, the investors tell a story about some of the most odd and unusual situations they've ever encountered as investors. This is the segment called The Strange and Unusual. On today's special segment, we have Henrique Dubugras of Brex. Henrique, what's the strangest, most unusual, or most memorable situation you've been in as a founder?
I think the most memorable ones are the big issues and the big failures. I remember once in Pagarme, there was a glitch in our code from one of our engineers that they started processing all of our transactions with the wrong amount. So people were just getting charged different amounts. And, we were probably still 12 people at the time. So, if we didn't fix it, we would definitely go out of business. And we just spend the next 36 hours calling our processor, trying to reprocess all the ones with the right amount for 11 people, without any sleep. So that was definitely a memorable experience.
On today's special segment, we have Beezer Clarkson of Sapphire Adventures. Beezer, what's the strangest, most unusual, or most memorable pitch that you've received?
Oh, I go ask a GP that has a colorful story. I feel like the GP pitches are not these wildly crazy. People don't come in with props. You don't get costumes. You really don't get these things. I hear these stories that GPs tell me what the CEOs do, and you're like, wow, no one's built me a Lego fortress for things. No, we get slides. I think I think the most memorable pitches are when that lightning strikes and you just believe. You just go on this journey with the GP and you're like, I 100% get why you're doing this. And it doesn't have to be the most charismatic, right? I mean, obviously that's a really powerful connector, but sometimes folks who aren't, it just lands and you're like, I get it. I see through your eyes. I can see this world. And for me, that's the part of the real energy of being an LP. You're like, this is going to be super cool. But again, we don't there's not a lot of toys and artwork and stuff like that. That's just not how the pitches work.
On today's special segment, we have Jim Douglas of Fulcrum Equity Partners. Jim, what's the strangest, most unusual, or most memorable pitch that you've ever received?
It's not a strange pitch. Can I just say a cool business? Because I just saw it again today.
Of course.
And it's a consumer play, so we'd never do it. But this guy is going to be wildly successful. Is a company called Get Spiffy.
Get Spiffy. Nice.
Do you know it?
No.
It's a mobile car wash business. And it's the CEO is the CEO of Channel Advisor out of the Raleigh-Durham area. Took that public, was wildly successful in that. And this is his second gig or third gig, probably. But so it's mobile car wash, right? So the convenience of it, nice app. He comes to my house. I get our 2 cars washed. And then he adds to it oil change because he's got this easy system on the truck to change oil.
Love it.
Now he's added to that filter changes, tire changes. And he's got these 3 different size vans. And I would never invest in a consumer business. I would definitely never invest in one that was capital intensive. But this is a great business.
Wow.
Because it's such a need and it's so convenient and it's scaling like mad. It's doing really well. And I just saw it again today. I was like, when I first saw it, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. That's just a lot of moving parts and a lot of capital. And I get it. But it's the whole notion of how many things you get a beachhead with a customer and what else can you sell them while you're in the driveway?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
I love it. I mean, it goes back to your point about the quality of the team, because I've seen mobile oil change as a business. I feel like I've seen that probably 10 times over the past 7 years, and none of them have gone anywhere. And then he finds a frequent use case, which is washing your car, and then pairs that with other value-added services.
And then he also goes to office buildings and says, "Let me set up in your
brilliant
instead of having Johnny do all the car washing, let me do it. It'll be reputable. I'll give you a kickback and cut, I guess would be a better way to say it. So he's got the one-to-many, builds brand. And then I also, then you have them come to your house on the weekend and wash your cars on the weekend. So it's like, it's really scaling. What I like seeing is ones that you have to stick with what you know and what you're comfortable with. But it's always enjoyable to me to see somebody just break the rules on what I would consider difficult rules. And he's absolutely broken them. It's amazing the number of things you can sell off the back of a truck to somebody around your car. Your car has a lot of needs.
Yeah. Well, if they're in Chicago, my car will be getting spiffy this weekend.
You should look. I think they're in Chicago.
Wow.
You put the app on your phone. You get the app on your phone. It's easy.
Love it. On today's special segment, we have Avichal Garg of Electric Capital. Avichal, what's the strangest, most unusual, or most memorable startup pitch you've received?
Well, there are two that come to mind right off the bat. So one is Cruise, which is obviously it's GM's self-driving group now. They're required for, which looks like a total steal at this point. I think they're required for $1 billion or $1.5 billion. But didn't they somehow carve back out, or? Well, I think they're like a wholly owned subsidiary of some sort. I don't remember what the exact corporate structure is. And then they went on to raise a bunch more capital. Okay. And so a bunch of, they've since, I think they're probably worth 20 to 30 billion now. Which is why I think that acquisition, $1 billion or $1.5 billion is a steal. But that pitch was pretty amazing, because at the seed round, it was an aftermarket mod. It wasn't a fully self-driving car that they were building. It was an aftermarket mod for Audis, because Audis have a really great way to be able to plug into the car and control it electronically. And so it was actually like a thing it was like a $10,000 attachment that you could put on top of your Audi to sort of give you like cruise control plus. So when you're on the highway, you like push the button and the car can all of a sudden drive itself. And so it had these like, sensors and cameras and LiDAR and all this kind of stuff on top. And it was an aftermarket mod. And the seed pitch for it was they'd rigged up a PlayStation to show you how it would work, in the car. And so literally what I did was, when I saw the seed pitch, they like wired up this car, and they brought it over into a parking lot. And then I drove the car around in the parking lot with like a PlayStation controller, which is like pretty awesome actually. And, but what it really demonstrated was that like actually all the hardware was I think the concern people had was like, how hard is the hardware problem? And all of a sudden when you see it, like you can drive a car with a video game controller, you're like, oh, the hardware is not the hard part. And then having worked in like machine learning, you're like, oh, I think actually the machine learning problems are totally solvable here. And so that was, I think it's just like a killer seed pitch, where you just like bring a car and you're like, hey, look, like we're like 70% of the way there. Like, this is a totally solvable problem. The other one that was extremely memorable, but in a totally different way, was Boom Supersonic. Mm-hmm. And what was crazy about Boom was, so the founder had previously sold like a small, mobile app company to Groupon. He'd been at Amazon for years. And so he understood e-commerce. And so he tried to do this e-commerce startup, and it didn't work. And it was sort of like an acqui-hire-ish kind of a thing. And so he was senior at Groupon for a little bit. And frankly, he was miserable. Fighters? It was Barcode Hero was the company that he sold to Groupon. So he was just miserable. And so he used to live up in Oakland, and he would come down to Palo Alto to fly, because he just loved flying. He's been a pilot since he was 18, and he just loved it. And he'd been thinking about ideas in that space for a long time, but he was like, how would I possibly do something in aviation? Like I don't have a PhD in like aero, right? I'm a computer scientist. Like what can I possibly even do there? And so at a certain point, he just said, you know what? Like I'm going to start another company. I would love to do something in aviation, but I just need to kind of go back to basics. And so he like locked himself in his basement for a year, and retaught himself like calculus and physics and fluid dynamics, and just like retaught himself all this stuff. And he long had this idea of like, why are we not flying faster? And he kind of had this like Bezos like moment where he's looking at some data, essentially, time on the x-axis, flight speed on the y-axis, and it just flatlines. And in technology, and it actually comes back down because we no longer have the Concorde. And so we're actually flying slower than we were 25 years ago. And so in technology, you just don't see a curve that goes up and to the right and then comes back down, right? That's a very strange curve to see in anything technology. It just usually keeps going up and to the right. And he started probing on that, and he was like, what is going on here? And, the conventional wisdom was that you can't fly supersonic, the math doesn't make sense, the cost doesn't make sense, yada, yada. And he'd sort of, taught himself calculus and fluid dynamics. And so he built a spreadsheet model that was basically like, if you were to try to build a supersonic plane, like what would it take? Like how fast would it fly? What would the fuel load be? And he just basically built a model in Excel. And his model showed that you actually should be able to fly supersonic. But it was economically viable both to build a supersonic airplane and to fly and operate a supersonic airplane. And he said, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense, because if this is true, we should be flying supersonic. So clearly I'm wrong. I'm an idiot. I've only been in my basement for a year. And so I must have some misunderstanding about the world. And so he went to Stanford. He just showed up at a professor's office hours in the aeronautics department, in the aero department, and said, hey, look, I'm not a student here. I'm just some guy. Can I bug you for 15 minutes? Can you look at my spreadsheet model? Because I think we should be flying supersonic based on this, but I must have some bug in my spreadsheet. Can you just sit down and walk through this with me? And at the end of the conversation, the professor said, no, actually, your spreadsheet is right. Actually, this all makes sense. And in fact, I think some of your assumptions might be too conservative. I think you could actually do even better than this. And so he left the meeting and was like, wait a second, this means we should be flying supersonic. And he's like, I think I'm just going to start a supersonic airplane company. And the rest is basically history. And so his pitch was just walking you through the spreadsheet. So it was a sort of crazy, I'm going to build a plane and it's going to fly supersonic and we're going to be bigger than Boeing. We're going to do what Tesla did to the car companies. We're going to do that to Boeing, and Airbus. And the leap of faith, the faith that you need to take is look at my spreadsheet, which is a far cry from building a plane, right? But once you walk through it, it was the math just was so clear, that it really changed my worldview of, wait a second. Okay. There's a lot of execution risk. There's a lot of capital risk. It's going to take hundreds of millions of dollars for this thing to work. But here's this person who's figured out something totally counterintuitive about the world, that everybody thinks this thing is not possible. And it turns out when somebody sits down from first principles and does the math, it's completely possible. And the rest is history. I mean, they just, they're about 5 years in now, and they just, rolled out their XB1, which is, it's going to fly, I want to say it's going to fly Mach 1.8. So it's the fastest, non-military jet, ever produced, privately.
How many passengers on that?
That's going to be just one. It's a test pilot. And so the idea with that is they're taking a very, software approach to it. So it's an iterative approach where you can, you don't want to build the full 50-seater and that takes 10 years. So the intermediate, their alpha test, is essentially 1-seater. And you get to test a bunch of your avionics, you get to test flight controls, you get to test a bunch of your assumptions in sort of this alpha test. So they're already doing ground tests on it, it's built, it's constructed, and now they're testing it on the ground. And then they're going to do sort of runway tests, and then the flight tests start, I believe, early Q2, end of Q1, Q2 2021. And so it's pretty remarkable. I mean, it went literally from a spreadsheet to a supersonic plane that they built that is going to fly supersonic in a couple months here.
Amazing.
And then on the other side of that, they'll start, assuming the tests are positive and they sort of get all the data that they need from their sensors, then they've already started designing the full scale version, the 50-seater, but they'll actually start sort of building it, which is kind of crazy to think about, starting wind tunnel tests and so on.
Well, maybe you can link them up with your guys at Cruise, and you can hook it up to the PlayStation controller and
actually
have some fun.
Actually, Kyle from Cruise was one of the seed investors in this company as well.
Oh,
so
very cool.
He's been involved since the beginning.
That will conclude this installment of Investor Stories. If you're enjoying the program and would like to see it continue, take a moment and leave a 5-star review in iTunes. Also, if you'd like updates on new content from TFR, as well as the top 10 VC articles every week, go to fullratchet.net and sign up for the newsletter. Okay, that will wrap things up for today. Until next time, over-prepare, choose carefully, and invest confidently. Thanks for joining me.